Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. This is Fabiana, the Marketing Director at Oxys. We're very happy to have you here today for our third part of our webinar series around maximizing the value of your UiPath automation program. As you know, the focus for today is going to be around UiPath Test Automation and the benefits that you can expect from this technology. And I'm very happy to introduce our panelists for today. Eduardo Diquez, the head of our Intelligent Automation practice at Oxys, is going to be facilitating the panel. And then we also have Vikram from the UiPath team, as well as Niraj from the VMware team. I'm going to let them introduce themselves shortly. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eddie. Just a quick reminder for everyone before we get started, your lines are muted. So if you have any questions, you can submit them through the chat or through the question panel. And we will be making sure to address the questions throughout the discussion, at the end of the discussion. And if we don't have time, we'll make sure to, reach out to you and have a private conversation about those questions. So welcome, Eddie, and welcome, everyone.
Thank you, Fabi, and thanks for everybody that is joining. For the people who are joining for the first time in this webinar series, know that this is the third episode of the webinar series, where we're going to be talking specifically about test automation from UiPath and the benefits to your automation program. If you want the previous episodes, just go to our website and you'll find those episodes there. So as we're grounding the conversation around how to maximize the value of your automation program, we wanted to always start with our slide that talks about the three main components, which is having the right automation vision and governance, also having and managing the right talent to be able to implement and make sure that your automation program is providing the best value, and also having the right technology enablers that are able to get that great value and ROI from your automations on your program. And with that, I think as a continuation to our previous conversation around support, we wanted to talk about a little bit of some of the challenges that organizations are having and how this test suite can really help. With less than 15% of organizations, being able to actively scale their automation programs, we wanted to understand why so difficult. And you're seeing here at the beginning, all automation programs are on what we call the automation honeymoon. Everything is great and people are building the automations and everybody's excited. But then the reality comes after these automations are going to production, and a lot of the value that you expected from your automations can really start to erode. With unplanned maintenance and not having the right governance to make sure that your automations are always being productive and providing the value that the organization is expecting at the time they're expecting it, having greater complexities that expected technically wise, which really opens our eyes. And as I always said, and I said it on the previous series, automation really begins and your journey really begins once the solution is in production. Everybody gets really excited about implementing, but they are really taking for granted a lot of the work that needs to happen once the automations are there. And you got to be thinking, how is the automation going to be working 2 years, 3 years from now, when talent changes and applications changes. And this was something very interesting that I also found on a recently conducted survey by UiPath, that what are the causes that create more maintenance? And 42%, this is not eye-opening to me, given that we're on this every day, but applications change. Most applications, and those changes can be very different, from application changes that are owned by the same organization that you control, when deployments are going to be done, they're part of your DevOps. But there's a lot of application changes that you don't control. You're working on third-party platforms that tend to change. And it's really important for you to have the right proactive way to understand when changes happened, what changed, and have the right structure to go and take it to the next level. And this is where test automation can really provide a lot of visibility. And this other topic that I also looked at that I really thought was interesting is that most COEs are only testing RPAs during the development, but they don't keep continuously testing to understand what's happening. 23%, they don't test RPAs after they've gone into production, and only 17% do testing constantly. So all of these things have the right recipe for really this erosion on the actual results expected, and this is where your automations program tend to plateau or really have difficulty scaling across the organization because you lose credibility. And that's the number one thing that we want to make sure that we avoid. So before we get into the panel, and after sharing a little bit of this background information on why this topic is going to be so interesting and important, I wanted to throw out our first polling question. And we wanted to get a gauge on how many automations you're currently having to understand a little bit of the complexity of the environment of the panel, right? If of the attendees. So,
Thank you, Eddie. I have launched the polling question. We have started to receive the votes. I'm going to leave it open for a couple of more seconds, and then I'll show you the responses. All right, so I'm closing the poll now. And let me share with you the results. So 32% have not started the RPA journey yet. 32% have between 1 to 10 automations. 24% have more than 20, and then 11% are in the piloting stage.
Perfect. So thanks for that, Fabi. So here we can see that there's a big mix, right? A lot of people have not started yet, which we're now into year 5 of this wave of transformation with RPA, and seeing how a lot of organizations are adopting it. But really thinking, once you get, the first 1 to 10 automations, you're not really feeling the pain of support. You're not really feeling the pain of having to have a very complex environment to manage. Once you get over 20, it really becomes difficult. And this is where Test Suite starts to really bring a lot of value to the organization. So I just wanted to recap some of what we wanted to talk about today. So in today's panel, we wanted to really, understand what is test automation and why should you guys consider it. The level of test automation, there are different levels, and we're going to talk about why you cannot just automate every single test case. And this takes us to the second question: should all automations be tested? And some of the key steps to get started. We're also going to talk about some of the benefits and challenges that we have seen taking Test Suite into production. So this being said, UiPath Test Suite really comes into play to enable greater confidence and speed in the releases of your automation programs. So a lot of times it takes a lot of steps to go through UAT, getting back the results of every single scenario of the different automations, which really delays going into production, because now you have an additional dependency that you're waiting. In order to shortcut that space, Test Suite can really speed up the releases. You want to make sure that you have all the requirements of your automations being tested before you deploy, with an actual verification process that is not manual or human-based, that is prone to errors. And sometimes people shortcut. I don't know how many times I work with clients that say, hey, yeah, the automation is ready to go into production. We put it into production, and for some reason the results are not as expected. And this can shortcut that and give you a lot more confidence in the deployment of your automations. And to me, the most important, being proactive, which is know before your business partners, is the number one value the COE can bring to the business. It's making sure that you are there before the business, for them to get an email saying your automation had this issue, we're taking care of it, it's going to be re-released in the next few hours, we'll let you know once it's done, provides a sense of confidence that is really hard to really provide or get to without automation. And this is where Test Suite can really help. So knowing that there's a lot of organizations that have started, many have more than 20 from the results that Fabi said, I wanted to throw in the second polling question around: where are you guys on your test automation journey? Are you evaluating test automation? Are you piloting it? Have you started, or you haven't tried it yet?
Thank you, Eddie. So we have around 28% of the vote so far. I'll give it also a couple of more seconds. And it's interesting, with so many companies in the early stages of evaluation, I'm sure that they're gonna still be evaluating as well, but it's good that they're doing it very early on in the process. So So these are going to be interesting results. All right, so closing the poll now. So yeah, 47% are in the stage of evaluation, 6% piloting, only 24% are actively using it, and 24% are not even considering it at this point.
Perfect. Thanks, Fabi. So with this demographic information now, I wanted to get started with the panelists. So I'm really excited to have Niraj Mathur and Vikram Porolkar to added to the panel today. Niraj, would you mind sharing a little bit of your background before we get started?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone. My name is Neeraj Mathur, Director Intelligent Automation at VMware. I lead the intelligent automation program here at VMware, really responsible for end-to-end, from infrastructure to the architecture, some parts of the delivery. We are actually quite mature COE, which has delivered automation across the organization as well. So scaling is one of the key focus for us, and that's where the test automation actually becomes important, and hence what we tried so far. So looking forward to this discussion.
Awesome. Thanks, Niraj. Vikram, would you mind also sharing a little bit of your background?
Yeah. Hey, guys. My name is Vikram Porolkar. I'm a principal sales engineer with UiPath. But prior to UiPath, I worked at Accenture, where I learned a lot about best practices, implementation life cycles, and one of my last roles was as a test lead there. I started at UiPath back in 2018, so naturally when they released the Test Suite product in 2020, I quickly became one of the SMEs there, and I'm now part of our new Test Suite specialist team, again, focusing both on RPA testing, but more recently on application testing as well.
Thanks, Vikram. And I think your perspective on also application testing and seeing how organizations that have not even started their RPA programs can really benefit from Test Suite as a solution for their DevOps. It's going to be great on this discussion. So let's get right into the panel. And Niraj, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the benefits that you have seen from test automation and that you feel organizations should really think about when they're thinking about their RPA programs.
Yeah, I think it really boils down to two parts, right? One is really the quality of the delivery, which is very important in this case. Because if you start thinking about the test automation from the beginning of the project itself, that brings in the conversation of having the right level of test data, test scenarios. You start writing that in as part of your BRD also. So it really results into the proper quality of your code and the quality of your bot itself. The second advantage is really around speed. And I know this is actually a topic which could be debatable as well, because the one thought process there is that, hey, if I'm actually doing some extra work for test automation, then I'm really adding some additional cycles for delivering it, right? So my speed of delivery could actually hamper. But if you really look at in a longer term, in terms of the changes which you make or any support issues which you may end up actually resolving this, the overall testing cycle reduces quite significantly if this is actually really introduced in a proper manner. So I'll really put that into two buckets at the quality of delivery and speed of delivery.
Thanks, Niraj, and that is a great point for people to understand as a little bit more in detail. As you're building test automations, naturally you have to use the Studio products from UiPath to actually create the test cases, and it does extend a little bit the development of an automation, but on the back end you get a lot of benefit by not having to test this manually going forward. So I agree. Vikram, is there anything that you would like to add specifically to some of the key benefits that you see that organizations should look into Test Suite for?
Yeah, testing is all about risk mitigation, right? So each organization will have different levels of risk. I've come across some organizations that decide not to test. They decide to just deploy something and wing it, right? Now, obviously, that could result in a lot of different issues, but every so often, it could be developed perfectly and you won't know until later, right? So each organization is going to be different. Most enterprise organizations, they will have robust testing practices in place today, but a lot of times they're very manual in nature. And so if you're automating a process, why are you doing any part of that automation process manually? And that's where test automation just naturally makes sense. With regards to risk mitigation, we see a lot of customers getting initial benefits of faster time to production, more reliable automations in production, but then more long-term, we've seen a lot of organizations get experience with reusability. In fact, that they will automate something in one application, but then just by asking questions across the organization, hey, would this automation provide you value in other areas that you interact with it? That's where we've heard a lot more QA teams speak up and say, hey, I'm actually doing manual testing and I see you've already automated 6 things that I do manually today. How can we reuse those for what we do, even though it's not necessarily a production process? It's still something that is done just in another part of an organization.
It's great. So with this,
Eddie, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think you need to reshare the screen because we're still seeing the last polling question. Sometimes it happens, so you just stop presenting and present again, and you should pull the PowerPoint slide.
Okay, let me share the screen. Is that showing the screen again?
And no, not yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to
Is that now?
No. So I stopped. So I'm gonna give you the present. Do you have? There we go. Now we can do it. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry for that technical difficulty. So let's continue with. Let's talk about some of now benefits. Now let's talk about some of the challenges. Now, should all automations be tested automatically? And you know, there's, you know, at the beginning of this, naturally everybody has this a picturesque, perfect picture that you can bring in Test Suite and automate the testing of everything. But there's naturally some real live operational complexities that need to be taken into consideration as you're going down the path of test automation, so that you have realistic expectations. We know even when developing automations that, you know, rarely we are able to catch every single scenario the moment that we design automations. By the time we get them to production, they look fairly differently. The same kind of thing can happen with test automation, and I wanted to get some of your take. Neeraj, would you mind sharing a little bit of the challenge that you guys have seen while doing this?
Yeah, I think it really boils down to what is available at the business application and the process level in terms of the data which we need to test automatically, right? So in some cases, you know, you may not even have the lower environment to test. And in that case, you know, you can really do a manual testing, as Vikram was talking about, and as a one-time testing, and that's pretty much it. And unfortunately, they may have to be done in production environment as well. But more often than not, it's not just only the environment, it's actually the test data availability in the lower environment becomes actually quite frequent challenge. Just because sometimes it's the nature of the process that it's a moving target. At times it's actually that you just can't have a consistent test data available in your systems so that you can run on a regular daily or weekly basis the same test scenarios on that. So we have to actually work some ways around it, work with the business, sometimes even create a test account, sometimes create some test data which can be persisted for a longer duration so that you can consistently really try the same scenarios to make sure that the bot which you build really works as it was expected. The other challenge could also be the access, right? Because you get really the access to the application at times only while you're doing the development, and then once you migrate the bot into the production environment, the access to your lower instance can be removed as well. Again, policy, security, environment related, multiple reasons why that can be done. And in which case, if you don't really have a longer duration access available to the business application, you won't be able to run the test automation also on this. So these are the really things which needs to be considered in the beginning itself while you are really building up the test automation program. That's the level of the engagement is required with the business application or business architecture team also.
Thanks, Raj. Vikram, is there anything that you would like to add?
Yeah, and so that's where the beauty of UiPath comes into play. I agree that most what we call legacy test automation tools have those kind of challenges, and they definitely should be addressed. But with the power of UiPath, you can basically collide the benefits of RPA with test automation. So when I hear I don't have test data in my environment, my natural response is going to be, what is the process to get that test data in? And let's go ahead and automate it. Let's create an attended automation so that at a moment's notice, a tester, as they prepare for testing, can get the test data ready for their environment. If they don't have access, what's the process in order to get them access, for especially if it's temporary, how do we get that extended? Well, IT has processes in place. They probably just don't have the bandwidth. So let's go ahead and provide IT automations in order to such that just from a portal, I can send a Slack message or a Skype message, and instantly IT via a robot would then grant me access based on my credentials and my permissions. So that's where we're inventing a concept of what we call a digital tester, where it really identify all the challenges that testers have today once they try to automate something, and go ahead and one by one create RPA processes to automate them. And then you have the traditional, of course, test automation side of things where you're actually automating the test scripts, and that of course can also be done with UiPath Test Suite.
Perfect. And I see, you know, in some cases you'll be able to do that. In some cases you actually, there is no data at the moment. There's a lot of data that is time sensitive. In healthcare, we see a lot of that with, you know, specific pending decisions on payers and things of that nature that are really time sensitive, that they only stay on that specific stage for less than 24 hours. So it does require some manual extraction, but I get, Vikram, your point on there's a lot of things that can be done to avoid having to create all this, you know, test data at the moment of creating the testing. And this is why we also wanted to see and understand that it not necessarily has to be everything or nothing. You can have standard projects that are basically tested manually. This is the ones that are, you know, testing is really not critical, and you want to do this in a specific requirements of time. It requires a lot less development to get fixed, but you can actually have that visibility and activity coverage report, which is one of the key things that you want to have, right? That you know how much of the code and all its branches and decisions were tested while you were doing test automation. In some cases, there are some branches that you'll never be able to get to because they happen without your knowledge, and you can't really replicate, you know, it happening. You think about some portals that you come in, and sometimes a pop-up comes up, and then you liberate it from it, or you build a specific code then and there to be able to make sure that the next time it happens, your robot does not get stuck. In order to replicate that, it's impossible. So those are kind of the areas where you'll never be able to get to, but it's important for you to understand that it's okay. Then you go to test libraries, where there's a lot of reusable components, and this is a great benefit of test automation, that you can now really test these reusable components on a you know, continuously, and know at any moment in time where something breaks, you'll know that the automations that depend on that reusable component will break. So it is a one catch-all to key processes that are required for more than one automation, and it's a great benefit to being able to provide what I mentioned before, this proactive environment of support. And then the holy grail of Test Suite and deployment, it's the CI/CD, really getting to that Git, you know, repository, and being able to really, you know, go through your framework review, going through all your controls of deployment, having Test Suite test all the environments, and if they're all positive, it can be automated and deployed automatically. And you know, you would do this for the large scale automations that provide huge value to the organization, and that the organization depends on them day in and day out. So with this being said, I also wanted to talk, have a little bit of a more of a product conversation with Vikram in the next few slides about UiPath Test Suite for application testing, not necessarily so much for RPA. And I wanted to, like, he already mentioned some of the big differences. We don't got to be repetitive on that around being able to deploy the RPA technology, but really getting into the details of how that can really be different from existing test software, testing software. So Vikram, just we'd love to get your take on how is it different, and for people to really think that this is not only to test automation solutions.
Yeah, sure. And I think the easiest way to start when you're comparing different tools, how are things different, is understanding the competitive space. With the RPA side of things, UiPath was traditionally competing with the Automation Anywheres, the Microsofts, the Blue Prisms of the world. With test automation, it is truly an additional market that we're entering into. So a lot of people on the call might be familiar with Selenium or Tricentis Tosca or Eggplant, right? And each of those things, if you look at it, Eggplant doesn't compete with Automation Anywhere. Tricentis doesn't compete with Blue Prism. So that convergence of a single automation platform itself is going to be the biggest value proposition you can have. Because what does that mean? You have fewer time spent on enablement for your developers. Everyone's talking the same language. You have more people working towards the same goal at an organization, which is automation, regardless of whether that's in a application non-prod environment or in an application production environment. That's the sharing and reusability you see there. And then, of course, one of the reasons why we are the leader in the RPA space is because of our versatility, our interoperability. So the ability to automate any UI, API, any packaged application, mainframe, custom app, Java, .NET, it really doesn't matter for our point of view, but that just means, again, you're consolidating everything into a single tool rather than using 20, 30 different testing tools today. As far as innovation, we are always bringing AI into the mix. We've led that space on the RPA side of things. We're bringing that same innovation mindset over to the testing world. We are still one of the first vendors and only vendor that has both capabilities. And lastly, we want to also understand that a lot of people have made massive investments into existing test automation or testing tools today. So we want to have the ability to fit into the existing tool stack, whether that's through native integrations or via SDKs or CLIs, where we can help you build an integration to, again, fit into that existing landscape.
Awesome, Vikram. Thank you so much. So with that being said, I know some of you may not know, but we wanted to ask the question about specifically application testing and how is it performed in your organization. If you know, are you using Test Suite for that purpose? Are you using other like Selenium, like the one that Vikram just mentioned? Are you doing it manually, or you just are not aware, don't know?
Thank you, Eddie. I just launched the question. In the meantime, I have a question here that I'm trying to understand, but they're saying, how are you selling to Tricentis customers or Selenium or Sauce Labs, etc.? Not sure what they're meaning, but I guess, Vikram, you covered when talking about the difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that he mentioned it at the end. You can take this one, Vikram, and just reiterate.
Yeah, so I think one of the main things is don't treat test automation necessarily as anything. Test automation is still automation, right? And so UiPath has the ability to automate things. Now, when I'm talking to a testing specific audience, there are going to be specific things around test sets, test cases, test management, and small nuances there that we've added additional functionality to, and that's what we call UiPath Test Suite. UiPath Test Suite is just and we have a slide on this coming up, but it's basically a combination of proven technology from the RPA space with the addition of test management functionality in order to be able to have those intelligent conversations with current customers of those different tools. In addition to that, we do have migration strategies available today, as well as coming down the road that can proceed with additional conversations. But it's all about identifying what's the pain point. Are you at 100% test automation? What are your goals around test automation? And that's really how we continue to have those conversations with those types of customers.
Thank you, Vikram. And I just shared the responses to the last polling question. So 50% are still doing it manually, 22% don't know, 25% have other testing software, and only 3% are doing it with UiPath Test Suite.
Thanks, Fabi. So continuing onto the panel, we just wanted to see actual Test Suite in action. I think Vikram was mentioning about the upcoming slide. And I wanted for Vikram to provide an overview of the solution and then provide an actual world showing of the real life showing of the Test Suite in action, so that you guys can get a flavor of what it actually is. So Vikram, do you want to take it on?
Yeah. So let's start on the RPA side of things. I'm going to have an end-to-end process. Let's say it's invoice processing. I actually have two scenarios that I'll be showing today. Invoice processing is great, one example. I'm using UiPath Document Understanding to read an invoice, and then I'm going to enter that information into SAP, let's say transaction code VA01, right, to create a sales order. Now that itself is a process automation, and today what I'm able to do is do full non-production testing, test that scenario end to end. Now let's say SAP, I'm converting over to from ECC to 4HANA, and I want to be able to test the creation of a sales order, right, as part of that process. The great news here is that the same automation modules, right, the login sequence, the navigate to VA01, the creating the actual sales order by entering data regardless of where that data came from, whether it's a physical invoice or synthetically generated data, all of those same reusable components can be their building blocks. So I can put them together in a different configuration, and all of a sudden I have a test case. All I need to do for that test case is add an assertion on top of it. So that's where we see that convergence is we don't worry about process automation or test automation. Instead, we're worrying about the building blocks, identifying those first, and then making sure they work reliably such that they can be leveraged by two additional teams, right? Test automation team as well as the process automation team. Because each team is going to put those building blocks together in different ways. And so we have various customers, Cisco, Chipotle, that there's a lot of materials out there on the internet that those two customers are the first of our public references that are really adopting that to heart, and they talk about the value that they've seen because it really accelerates as soon as you have a single automation library, how fast you can start using those building blocks and puzzle pieces to build large murals and masterpieces at the end.
Thanks, Vikram. And I think what you mentioned, and that reiterates the difference, is its ability to really automate not just the test case or organization and not having spreadsheets around what needs to be done, but actually having reliable automations that can do this for high volume testing reliably and getting an actual systematic creation of what a positive testing scenario looks like without, depending on humans providing their feedback.
Awesome. You want me to jump into this?
Yes, please.
Yeah, sure. So what exactly is UiPath Test Suite? So I kind of mentioned this earlier. It's the same studio you guys are familiar with, the same orchestrator, the same robots. We use that proven technology. However, for each one of these, we've added additional testing functionality. So for Studio, you have a testing activity pack, and you have the ability to integrate Studio with Test Manager. Orchestrator, same orchestration capabilities, but now there's a testing tab where you can separate out test data queues from your process queues. You have the ability to organize test cases into test sets. And then lastly, the robot piece. Now, why do we have a different robot? Well, this all comes down to the architecture behind how a process is built versus a test set. A process is a single point of entry. When you build a workflow in Studio, you have a single main.xaml file, and that's what the robot is executing. a start point position and an end position. With testing, you actually want to have multiple different start points, multiple different end points, multiple different scenarios. And previously, were you able to do test automation without Test Suite? The answer is yes, but it was very difficult because you had to manage each of your test scenarios in a different project because of that single point of entry. With Test Suite, we've removed that barrier. You have multiple different entry points. You can maintain hundreds of different test cases in a single project, sharing different libraries and reusable components, etc. And that's why an additional robot kind of license type had to be introduced. Now, to bring all this together, we have to have some mechanism in order for testers to perform their necessary capabilities of defining requirements, mapping them to test cases, and viewing historical test execution results. Orchestrator doesn't have that functionality, and so that's where Test Manager was introduced. Now, Test Manager has its own UI, but it has an open architecture as well. So if you don't want to use the Test Manager UI, you can still leverage Test Manager as that integration layer, such that the execution results you have from the UiPath platform are passed back and the automations are linked towards the test cases defined in the various tools you might use today, whether that's a Jira, X-Ray, SAP Solution Manager, ServiceNow, Azure DevOps, etc.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was naturally, that was a lot of information. And if you guys need additional information on exactly how to deploy it on your case, we'd love to have specific conversations with you guys. And lastly, I want Vikram to touch a little bit on this before we get into the actual demo.
Yeah, so this is just showing you kind of a visual representation of what I've been talking about before. You can see the tile at the very bottom. That's your automation library, sharing and reusing automation's infrastructure and skills. That's ideally now going to be the focus of your automation COE if you were to adopt Test Suite. Your testers, they're building automations, but ultimately they're mapping back and providing information to that library. Your RPA teams, they're creating process automations, but ultimately they are providing and sending information back to that automation library. So now you have 3 teams all using that same automation library, all maintaining it reliably, and you have a governance layer on top of that to really push automation, enforce those workflow analyzer rules, and ensure that all of the reusable components are built reliably, such that you don't need to worry about them failing once they're used as building blocks by the individual teams.
Awesome. So now we wanted to actually get into a demo to see how actually Test Manager works, and for that I think I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, and Vikram can show the screen.
Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Showing Studio.
Yes.
Cool. So I wanted to focus the demo today on application testing. Again, my demo story for RPA testing might be a bit different, but for application testing, we're going to typically start with what exactly is our test case. And so I have SAP test cases up here. And let's say, for example, I want to create a sales order. Now, the process of creating a sales order is going to be, I can break that down into individual building blocks. And we see those building blocks here. So first, I'm going to log in, right? And the idea of logging in, I can define it separately as a own library component, or I can just invoke it and drag it into my workflow. So that same process of building out your automations, this is not new, anything that I'm showing you here. Now, the beauty of this, though, is just the speed at which you can automate and test individual components. And so I have the ability to just right-click any of my libraries or anything I want to create a test case on and say create test case. Now I can define a template for this, but I'm just going to show you the default. The default method we use is a cucumber approach of a given, when, then sequence. Given is designed for your prerequisites. The when is going to be the actual invocation of that reusable component, and the then sequence is going to be your assertions. Now, do I need to use a reusable component? No, I could just start with my recording or with the dragging of activities and create those together. But the more reusable components you have, the faster you're building out your automations. Now in the activity section, we have this testing activity pack where I'm going to have various data activities. So I can synthesize and generate random data, whether that's a name, a number, a date. The great thing about this is if I didn't want to use these activities, I could go out to a fake name generator or a Mockaroo and generate test data there, retrieve it, and pull it into my workflow as well. But the most important thing about these test data activities is test data queues. And so I can centrally maintain all my test data, have a historical record of what test data I used and when as part of my orchestrator. The last piece is the then sequence, and this is where the assertions, this is the net new functionality of what exactly am I testing. And I have a couple different options. I have verify expressions with operators. Those are just basic functions, but I can verify a control attribute. And this one's extremely powerful because I have the ability to drag and drop any other UiPath activity and verify the output of an activity. So I could get text from the screen, I could get selector data or the color of a specific UI element and verify that. But what does this verify activity do? It's actually three things in one. It's an if-then statement, right? So it's going to tell me if my test passes or fails. It's going to allow me to define a log message for my audit trail. And it's also going to take a screenshot upon success or failure so that I can use that as an ability to analyze whether a test fails. Now, that's the studio side of things. Whenever I create an automation, I can run it here and I have a test explorer where I can view kind of test execution results. But more importantly, what I want to do is I want to run this fully unattended. And in order to do this, what I'm going to do is link back this automation to what I originally defined within Test Manager. So Test Manager is, or ADO or Jira is where you're going to say, what do I want to test? And I can link it back. And then I hit the publish button and send my automation over to Orchestrator. Now, the great thing is within Orchestrator, there's no additional kind of deployment mechanism or anything like that. I can go directly into Test Manager. And here you can see I defined the test case. I've linked it via an automation. And I can just go here and create a test set. So I can say, create a new test set. For this test set, I can assign and allocate any number of test cases that I've automated. And these can come from different projects. And then I can say, go ahead and execute. And notice Test Manager provides me the ability to both execute manually as well as execute in an automated fashion. As soon as I click automated, it's going to go ahead and start the execution. And this is where Test Manager is linked to Orchestrator. So this is actually starting an execution on my robot. So you can see it started running, and it's going to start going through each of my test cases one by one and update the results here within Test Manager. So let's go ahead and I'm actually going to just pause this real quick because I don't want it interrupting what I'm doing, and show you something I ran previously. Here's an example of an automated test set. I can go see here, okay, 3 passed, 2 failed. Let's go ahead and take a look at the past ones. And I can see the assertion. So here's my log message. What was I expecting? And I'm not limited to just one assertion. I could have multiple assertions for a single test case. I can see all the log information. So if it failed, and we'll get to that in a bit, I can see why it might have failed, or all the audit trail. So great, a file was created, a folder was created, what exactly happened. This is just the default, but I could add additional log information if I wanted to. And then of course I have execution details. If I wanted to pass in any test data dynamically, I could do that. And then I just see what machine was this executed on, what was the robot, what was the start time, end time, and what was the result. Now for a failed test case, let me find a better example. Here's a good run. I can see, okay, why did this fail? Here's a great screenshot that might help me. Oh, the verification's false because the claim status should have been paid. The status was actually active, so I can see and verify that. I can navigate manually and see, maybe investigate why might that have happened. But I also have the log information, and it shows kind of the error. Now, if it failed, it can fail for two reasons. It could be because the verification failed, or it could be a scenario where the test case actually faulted for some reason or another. And if we wanted to go into this, here you can see it didn't even reach the assertion step. And if I go into the log details, it's because something broke. And so this is a scenario where I can go to the developer and say, hey, can you just check whether the building blocks that you used in this test case are still valid? And that's a great example where you can, communicate with the developer team. And if you catch it at this step, you're not only testing your applications from a change control perspective, you're also testing your automations from a larger enterprise-wide perspective and being able to catch things earlier as necessary. So just a quick overview of Test Manager and Studio. Of course, we're going to be continuing to enhance these functionalities and features, and I just touched the surface, but definitely let my team know or the Oxys team know if you guys have any additional questions or concerns or want deeper dive demos.
Thank you so much, Vikram. That was great. So let me start sharing again.
Yep, we're in the demo page.
Awesome. So the last two topics that I wanted to know after understanding specifically how Test Suite works was, talent management. And I think you've talked a little bit, Vikram, on there. Does test automation require specific talent? And for this topic, I wanted Neeraj to really put a perspective on how did he manage, the deployment of Test Suite, and then any recommendations you may have for the audience.
Sure, Ed. So I think the short answer for whether you require a specific talent is really yes or no, right? Because it's really depends on what background your developer might really have coming into building the bots. But the place where it really requires a specific talent is really learning about the platform which you are using to build the test automation. But what is really important is that mind shift, because this actually really brings in, especially in the RPA realm, not as much as in the regular traditional software development space. But in RPA space, this is more of a paradigm shift for many people to think about when they are really getting into finding a right fit for the project. They need to also know that the test scenarios can be made, that the test data is available for them. And that has to be done right from the beginning. And then the skill level comes really based on just learning the tool which you are using to build those test scenario, test cases, and run that on a continuous basis, as Vikram has just showed. So key part is really that mind shift in terms of building, especially those who are traditionally building the RPA for quite some time. But when it comes to a specific talent, again, it naturally depends on the platform which you are using. So it's quite relatively very easy to actually pick it up.
Awesome, thank you, Neeraj. One of the things I also wanted to share in a very recent, also last year's RPA Developer Report, and I think we talked a little bit about this report on our previous webinar series. It was also interesting to me that with some of the most unliked activities that RPA developers do these days is to actually test RPA solutions. It's more of a non-exciting part of their job, and having this be part of their tools and their skills is going to be critical for also play, this little bit of a game and war of keeping your RPA talents. As we know, there's a lot of turnover, a lot of movement, a lot of developers are thinking about jumping, ship at any moment's time. So I think that having this as a solution also to really make their life better, easier, more exciting, less repetitive is going to be a critical piece of also really scaling, programs. So with that, we wanted to get to the fourth polling question around, how's your current COE model structured? Is it 100% in-house? Are you guys leveraging a third party for developing or supporting new bots only for the strategy and business analysis, or are you still figuring it out for your organization? Let's just give it a minute.
Thank you, Eddie. Yes, we have started to capture the results, and I'll display it in a second.
And while we're waiting on it, just to add one point on, why this could be actually the scenario is essentially really depends on the complexity of the automation which you are doing, right? The cases which we have seen in the demo are relatively much simpler, but when you come to like integrating the RPA with AI ML models, or even doing the end-to-end along with some sort of a document processing, that introduces a kind of complexity where the testing actually becomes even more important than doing a very low complexity automation itself. So I guess that whole manual process by which any developer would be really challenged by doing it on a regular basis, it's actually really important to automate the testing scenarios on those particular cases because of the nature of the process as well as the complexity around it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And Eddie, really quick on the responses. 36% are leveraging a partner for support of existing robots, 36% for new developments, 14% for strategy and business analysis, 23% are doing it fully in-house, and still 45% are figuring out the right model.
Awesome. Thank you, Fabi. And for the last topic, we wanted to get, so how to get started? We wanted to leave everybody with a little bit of a conversation around, okay, I haven't done it. How do I get started? Vikram, would you mind starting this specific topic?
Yeah, so the great thing about UiPath Test Suite is that it is flexible from a deployment option. So the easiest way to get started is go to cloud.uipath.com and sign up for an enterprise trial. That's the easiest way to start playing around with the tool. The other great thing is that we have a vibrant community. So forum.uipath.com is a resource that you can use alongside Google if you have any questions. But we also have a free academy at academy.uipath.com. And that will allow you, we have a couple 6 or 7 test suite specific courses that have real world applications, whether it's database testing, API testing, mobile automation, that will walk you through examples, give you the actual files, and allow you to, as well as step-by-step videos that you can get some hands-on practice. Once you go through that process, I think there's always a contact UiPath sales button on the page. It'll put you in contact with someone from the UiPath sales org, or you can again reach out directly to the Oxys team, and they'll be able to help you kind of play around with the tool, identify what exactly do you want to automate, and come up with a plan to ultimately make your organization successful.
Thank you. Is there any thoughts that you want to leave the audience with, Niraj, on how to get started, and what would you recommend, maybe do's and don'ts?
Yeah, I think from a COE point of view, there are a few things to really consider here when you are really getting started into it, right? And that boils down to integrating this in your governance model, in your operating model, in your support model, mainly because have that end goal. And end goal, as Eddie, you were showing previously, is to really have the fully automated CI/CD pipeline on that. Right, so with that as an end goal, it's very important to really make sure that how you govern this, how you operate that. Things like, doing some automated code review, for example, like we use a workflow analyzer in this case. The testing automation, becomes a very important part of your pipeline in the end. So it's really a small piece for the whole pipeline when you really look at it. So starting with that mindset and an end goal in mind, that okay, how I'm going to really operate when I'm delivering this, where this really fits in terms of my delivery cycle, any extra time I need, any extra business interaction I need for the test data, that has to be done. That has to be also involved in your governance model. And the most important part is that before the bot gets into the production, the support model has to be very solid here to say that, hey, before I approve anything which is going into production, have you done the code review? Have you done the test automation? If not, then why not? That those things really has to be in play. And it's easy said than done, but that end goal is really important to keep in mind, and then gradually on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think governance on taking down this path of much higher levels of I guess, complexity, but productivity do require a lot of thinking before you get started, and having that end in mind first is going to enable you to be successful. So I know we only have 5 minutes left, so I wanted to spend some time first if anybody had any questions to the panel, but also I think while that's happening, Fabio, you can open the final polling question. If there's anybody that is interested on scheduling some time to discuss with UiPath or Oxys, just let us know. If Fabio, you can open that polling question. If no, that's okay.
I just added the question, and I think one of the key things is a big portion of the audience hasn't even really started with RPA yet or UiPath yet in any way, and are somehow learning about the benefits of test automation from the beginning. But there's a lot of extra steps that you need to be thinking beyond just Test Suite, that we would really love to have a discussion on, how we can help you from the early stages. So, look at this consultation as something not just specifically for Test Suite, but really for discussing your overall automation program. And, also some people have been asking for the slides. Typically, we send them after the webinar, but a lot of those emails are getting to spam. So I suggest that if you really want to get a copy, just send me an email, fabiana.corredor@oxys.com, and I'll make sure to get you the slides later today or later this week.
Thank you, Fabi. So for the last thing, is there any questions? Let me go back to that slide. Is there any questions, Fabi, from the audience?
Yeah, so I think some of them we have been responding it throughout. There was a question about a person being new to RPA and not really understanding the term continuous CI. Let me go back.
Continuous deployment.
Right.
Yeah, CI/CD. So the whole idea with that is that you're going to be able to go through all the requirements of what will it take for the organization to be comfortable with the code that is going to go into production automatically. So the developer can actually submit the code that he believes is ready for deployment onto the pipeline, and it goes through a workflow in a way where it really looks at all the requirements that the code needs to be production ready, and it basically automatically deploys the automation, and you can use that pipeline to just continue to be testing and redeploying if there is any changes automatically.
Also, and then there was this question, like one of the questions was about hybrid model and whether your companies are doing hybrid versus all in-house. And this person is saying that they're getting started and that they're planning to use a partner for development, but what typically do you suggest when it comes to test automation specifically? Should I wait until I have some of the robots, or should I be considering it right away?
I think by now, everybody, there's no additional cost to Test Suite. Okay, once you have Orchestrator, you have the Studio Pro, which now it's been merged with Studio. Once you have your automation developer license, everything is embedded. So I think from the get-go, it's important for organizations to start thinking about what are the automations that will require constant testing, or what can it be used to help the organization, as Vikram was saying before, on automating some of the manual testing that is happening on the back end once new deployments are happening. So I think it definitely should be incorporated as part of the conversation from the get-go. But I understand that it's not necessarily for everybody, because it would be sometimes once you go in-house, it's too overwhelming of a knowledge development to get all the way up to test automation right away. So that's where a third party can really be useful for organizations that are going down that path.
Right. And
yeah,
I don't know
the important thing there is if you're testing sooner, you don't have to go back and rework a bunch of things later, right?
Yeah.
Testing is ultimately going to be and should be part because it's of your strategy, because it's all about risk mitigation. So it's likely to prevent things from breaking and prevent additional work in the future. But the ability to quantify what that work is not something you can easily do up front. So
yeah. No, I agree in principle. Actually, it's sooner is better in this case, primarily because there's certain best practices which needs to be followed to make your bot in quotes testable, right? And that's why it's really important to really start it sooner, so that you don't build technical debt over the period of time and the rework which will be required later on.
Well, thank you so much. The panel has been great. Thank you so much, Neeraj and Vikram, for being part of this today. Before that, I just wanted to leave you all off with don't miss the upcoming sessions of this continuous webinar series, where we're going to be talking about a little bit of measuring performance for your RPA, then talking about the UiPath Citizen Developer programs, and then really at the end, we're going to do a final either on document understanding or navigating the UiPath hyperautomation platform that's going to be based on popular demand. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Fabi, do you want to say final words?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say too that we're planning to incorporate a session on specifically UiPath document understanding, since we have seen a lot of interest as well on that, not just on the test automation side. And also, this is a living and breathing series, so we would love to also hear your feedback in terms of potential topics that we have not explored yet that we would like, that you would like to incorporate throughout the year. But yeah, hopefully we see you in the next sessions. And as I said, if you want some copies of the presentation, let us know and we'll send those to you. Thank you so much, and great job, guys. It was very insightful.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.